Right, before we start today's proceedings, I have an announcement. You will notice that with the audio video equipment has failed, so we're going back to the days of steam. Because of this, councillors wishing to speak will need to raise their hand at the appropriate time and wait to be called by the chairman. My vice chairman will make note and will take you in the order you've raised your hands. When you are called, you will need to press the large button. Stand when you've made your speech. When you sit down, please press it again to turn the microphones both on and off. The above difficulties mean we're only able to broadcast audio coverage of today's proceedings. Please do not remove the card from your microphone unit at any point. Thank you very much. And item number 1, apologies for absence. Right, they have been removed. I didn't know. Thank you for that, Councillor Brewis. So may I ask Debbie Barnes to report? Sorry? Oh, Sarah.
Councillor Graham Cullen.
Sorry, stand up.
Councillor Graham Cullen.
Apologies, Councillor Graham Cullen.
Oh, right. Sorry, I haven't got there yet.
Oh, sorry. I'm sure you said apologies.
But we'll make a note. If you kindly press your button again, please. Sarah?
Yeah.
Thank you. I will now ask Debbie Barnes for apologies, and we'll add that one to the list. Debbie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've received apologies from Councillor Boquet, Councillor Cullen, Councillor Lawton, Councillor Matthews, Councillor Spencer and Councillor Turner.
Thank you. Are there any further apologies? No? Okay. Item number 2, declarations of interests. Do councillors have any interests they wish to declare? Councillor Mrs. Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. It's agenda item 5, page 47. My company has until very recently been a long-term supplier of Mid-UK, which is mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further? Yes, Councillor.
Agenda item 7, it's just a personal interest, but my partner was the election agent for her in 2017.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further? Thank you very much. Item number 3, minutes of the meeting of the County Council held on the 14th of September be approved as a correct record and signed by me at the end. Are there any issues with the minutes of the meeting? Has any issues with them? So I'll take it as read, so I'll sign those, as I said, after the meeting. Straight on to item number 4, Chairman's announcements. Since the last meeting of the County Council, I have continued to carry out my civic duties with pride, representing the Council by visiting places and meeting people and organisations from all around the county. I thank my wife Diane for supporting me on these engagements, and also the Vice Chairman and Lady, Councillor Tony Bridges and Tina Wright, for representing us at civic functions when we have been unable to attend. It was an honour to be involved in the Armistice 100 commemorations on Remembrance Day, including a poignant service held at Lincoln Cathedral, which was well supported and attended by hundreds of people. We were delighted to welcome 2 members of the royal family to Lincolnshire, the first being HRH, the Earl of Wessex, when he came to visit the International Bomber Command Centre. This was followed earlier this week by HRH, the Princess Royal, when she officially opened the Market Raisin Railway Restoration Project and the Linkage Education Centre at Booton Park, Lincoln. On a sadder note, I have to report the death of former County Councillor Peter Robinson. Peter represented the Market and West Deeping electoral division from 1997 to May 2017. During that time, he served on the executive, where his portfolio included the areas of community safety, local strategic partnerships, diversity and social cohesion. He was also deputy leader from 2005 to 2012. Can I ask that members stand in silent tribute to Peter? Thank you. Please be seated. Just before I ask councillors to pay tribute to Peter, I'll just finish my announcements. Could I please remind councillors that the Highways briefing will follow today's council meeting at 2 p.m. here in the chamber. A complete itinerary of civic engagements since the last meeting of this council are available from the civic officer on request. Now, do we have any speakers regarding Peter? Councillor Martin Hill.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, Peter, I knew since he became interested in standing for the council back in 1996, but not only was he a council colleague, he was also a friend both to myself and I believe to this council, which is not always the case. Peter had his career in the army. He joined the army after leaving school and was an intelligence officer in the Army Intelligence Corps. And I think those qualities showed through sometimes, because even when he was my deputy, sometimes when he didn't want to do something, he never said he wouldn't, but somehow it never happened. And conversely, when he wanted to do something which I wasn't too keen on, he never disagreed with me, but somehow that thing also happened. So his qualities of army intelligence were probably well used here. I say he was also a friend to the council, because those of us who were here those years ago, there comes a time sometimes when you have to put your principles. Are you standing up for your principles for what is right or not? And some people fail that test, I'm afraid to say, when the time comes, and others don't. Peter passed that test with flying colours, and in a very difficult, challenging time for this council, he was very steadfast in standing up for the right thing to do. He was a very reassuring character, very tall, and had a big presence, and he had that lovely baritone voice which carried smoothly across the chamber and elsewhere. And although he was a Conservative, I wouldn't say he was to the right of the party. He was very much just about a Conservative, I think, even though he was deputy leader. And I think that's why also he was a genuine person, that he had a lot of respect across this council from all parts of the council, whether in good times or in bad. So it was, I think it's very appropriate that we pay tribute to him today. When he left the army, he was invalided out of the army when he got diabetes. So then they bought a care home in Market Deeping and ran that for a bit, and then they then sold that and then had a banqueting hall. And at his funeral, which some of us were privileged to attend, his wife was telling us how he enjoyed being front of house. She was doing all the cooking in the background, and Peter was mine host at the front of the house doing his mine host thing, which I think we can all imagine. And she did recall one occasion where they decided to have a medieval night at this banqueting hall, and so he decided he was going to dress up as Robin Hood. So he got his green tunic and pixie shoes, and also had green tights, which he put on as well, and a hat with a jaunty feather, which I think in itself was quite amusing, but apparently the tights kept falling down. So the vision of Pete, this big chap with green tights falling down all the time dressed as Robin Hood, is quite amusing. I think also he did have a hinterland beyond this council, and he wasn't just one of those people who sort of gets obsessed with politics and local government. He had lots of other things he showed an interest in as well. And he was a friend to many, very fair to everybody, I think. I don't think he was I never heard him actually raise his voice or actually fall out with anybody, although sometimes he was quite firm if he felt he didn't agree with what you were saying. His wife, it was upsetting that he died relatively young. I think he was about 74, but he had been poorly for some time, and he'd got Alzheimer's. So in one sense, his wife said, well, in a sense, it was a relief, because he was quite upset towards the end when he was obviously finding difficulty in memory and all the rest of it. But I think a really good councillor. He was here 20 years and a deputy leader for 8, a very loyal friend to myself and the council, and he will be missed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Councillor Mrs. Christine Talbot.
Oh, I forgot the instructions as ever. Don't follow instructions. It was a sad day when I heard that Peter had died, and Councillor Poll let me know. Peter was an extraordinary man, and we learnt about him from Judy, who very bravely did the tribute. And we also learnt about the fact that other things about Peter that many of us didn't know about. and it must have been really difficult for her. But I can remember, as the leaders alluded to, we were going through a horrible, horrible period, and there was a small group of us, and that's what worries me, Eddie. There was Chris Underwood-Frost, Barry Singleton, Peter Robinson, myself and Eddie, and Bernard Theobald. Well, Bernard lost his seat, Chris has died, Peter's died, and Barry's died. So Eddie, you and I are the last men standing from that particular group. So it's interesting times we live in. But at the end of the day, the thing I remember Peter for was his calmness, because I, at the time, was the portfolio holder when Martin became leader in the March the 17th, 2005. We won the election in May, and Martin was voted in as leader. And it was during that first year that I received a letter from a grandmother of a young girl, I think she was 15, who had committed suicide. And she had learnt how to do it because apparently, I don't know this because I don't go on the site, funnily enough, she had learnt the process of it all from being on the internet, because apparently there's a whole thing that tells people, especially children, how to actually end their lives. And I didn't know what to do with it. And Peter came over to my desk and he said, "Don't worry, I'll draft the letter." That's the sort of man he was. He was very calm, he was very kind, very unassuming in lots of ways. So to hear about the green tights and other things, which I won't go into, is extraordinary. But on the back of the Order of Service, there's the other Peter. There's this rather tall, handsome man in military uniform, and he doesn't have a beard. But I'm convinced there was an MI5 member at that funeral, because we always used to say Peter was a spy.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Talbot. Councillor Chris Brewis.
Thank you, Chairman. Very briefly, I too would like to mention the wonderfully moving tribute at the memorial service, which must have been difficult to do. But goodness me, when I was first elected, he was one of the first members I met, and he was always a friendly face and a very, very reliable source of information. And he's one of the nicest human beings I have ever met. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Brewis. Councillor Berry Dobson.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I didn't have the privilege of knowing Peter, but I have taken over his division, or part of his division, and as it was, as the boundary changes. But all I've heard from the parishes, and that's the Langtoft Parish Council, and in the Deepings, of what a great councillor he was and how he helped him. There was a 4-year gap between him leaving as councillor, county councillor, and me taking over, but his name was still there. So what I've heard this morning must reiterate what, or give that impression of what he was, which was a great guy. And it's a great privilege to serve in his place. And I know I met his wife, it was during the remembrance period, at a WI Institute's meeting in the church at Langtoft, and she said that he had died that night, and I was quite surprised to see her there, but she said it was a relief, and he died then peacefully. So we'd like, on behalf of the Parish Council, wish her and the family well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dobson. Councillor Mrs Sarah Parkin. Have I got you on? Sorry? Can't read his writing. Oh, sorry, Councillor Rob Parker.
Remember to do. I think the thing that we noticed most of all about Peter was that he came across as a nice person. You know, putting politics to one side, and we can at this particular time, he came across as somebody who you would actually want to like. I mean, when we talk about politics, and Martin made the point about Conservative, yes, but if I was going to describe him more accurately within the Conservative Party, I'd call him a one-nation Tory, one of those people that actually sees the world outside of the Conservative principles, but in a wider sense of everybody's got a recognition of the worth of everybody. His height made him look, in a sense, avuncular, because he always seemed to be looking down on most people, including me, but not in a way that was, in a sense, about me, but it was about his height. And the way that he held himself was such that he was always seemingly giving all the attention he possibly could to what you were saying at that particular time. And at some of those times, whereas has been said before, pretty difficult. He came on in 1997, and that was when Labour lost control and the council changed to Conservative control and Councillor Speechley. And we had a period where I don't think very many people will look back on it with anything other than a feeling that things could have been done a whole lot better. But as again has been said, I think it's right to say that somehow Peter Robinson stood above that particular group of Conservative councillors, but at the same time he had this, what I consider, otherworldly charm, as though he wasn't quite of this world and that the world was somehow passing him by, but at the same time he was aware of that and was doing his bit to make sure that what mattered to him still got done. And I do take the point that he was most comfortable with a background to do with his military background, with the fire service, because he seemed as though this was an organised body that he could relate to from his own military experience in terms of the way the fire service operated. And for a long period of time, he was a most effective political leader of the fire service. He also worked, as Martin and I know, at a regional level with East Midlands councils, when he did a lot of effective work on strategic migration, which was a matter that can split parties, but he actually brought to it a sound common sense, deceptively so, in the sense that I do pick up a similarity between what Martin saw and I saw, which was his deceptive nature of being able to get things done without actually seeming to get them done, without too much fuss. And that's an important issue when it comes to a politician, because we all get things done by kicking up a fuss, but to get things done quietly and behind the scenes is something that is a particular political skill. So yes, from our side of the house, he was much missed when he stood down, and even more so on his death. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Councillor Mrs Overton.
Thank you very much indeed. I would also like to add my condolences to the family, but also respect for Peter Robinson. When I joined, he and I were working together to try and sort out adult care, which at that time was in a bit of a condition. And I have to say, his calm work, enabling to go right cross-party to get to the nub of the issue, and just gently, together, we're able to keep pressing on the things that needed improving. And I'm really pleased to say that it was brought to success. So a huge thank you for a transformation, I believe, of that service. And thank you for all of the good work that he did for us and for his communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Overton. And Councillor Lewis Strange. Lewis.
I do thank you, Chairman. Peter Robinson, what a wonderful man. Dry sense of humour, honed in military intelligence. Honest, friendly, and a great friend to everyone across this council. I had the privilege of sitting opposite him in the executive office for about 8 years. And whenever I had problems, and I had many as a new councillor, I was an ex-farmer with straw, still with straw in my boots, probably still have, but he gave me a lot of advice in how to deal with people in his wonderful laid-back way. I've greatly valued his company. He was a great councillor here, and of course I also want to send my condolences to his family. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Strange. I think that's all we have regarding tributes. Have we further one? Oh, Councillor Worth, sorry, we'd missed you.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been lucky enough to follow Peter as the executive member for Fire and Rescue, and I vividly remember going to an awards evening in Woodhall Spa with Peter as he handed over the reins. And I think what struck me about that, other than the fact, you know, he is the ultimate gentleman, but as he was introducing me to myriads of firefighters from the bottom up right up to the Chief Fire Officer, it occurred to me in what high regard he was held in that service. He was quiet, but he got on with the job, and he was really well respected by everyone right across the board in that service, and I think that says an awful lot about him. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Worth. Right, there's somebody there we can't quite see. Another councillor towards the back in the centre? Councillor? Is that right, Councillor Mrs. Trollope-Blue? The floor is yours.
Better press the button. I would just like to express a quick tribute to Peter. I've known him for a long time, more when Martin was a county councillor. I know I've also taken over part of his division, which is the Deepings, Market Deeping and West Deeping. And what I remember about him was he was very approachable, had a lot of common sense, was easy to talk to, and in latter years things didn't work as well, but earlier on he certainly, as has been said here, got things done in a very quiet way. And I would obviously just to say that obviously my thoughts and that of my husband are with Judy and the family. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for those words. Have we any further comments from the floor? I think I would just like to ask, I knew Barry when I came in 2007, and I just found him to be just a true, sincere gentleman. I think that was, a view that Councillor Worth echoed as well. Thank you for those tributes. And I'm now going to ask Councillor Mrs. Elizabeth Sneath, please, to say a word or two. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, the 14th of December 2018, is the centenary of the momentous day in 1918 when the first women were allowed to vote in a general or national election in this country. Earlier in 1918, the Representation of the People Act was passed, which allowed the 8.5 million women over the age of 30 who met a property qualification to vote. But it was 10 years before all females over 21 were given the vote. Would all ladies, females, women in this chamber stand for a moment or for a few seconds just to show our solidarity with those brave women who fought so long and so hard to give us the freedoms and privileges which we enjoy today, including standing in this chamber. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Sneath. That's very appropriate. It's nice to recognise these anniversaries. It is important, and I think in the past women were downtrodden, but they deserve a place equal to men. And of course we've had a lady Prime Minister, and of course in America we've also had a black president, which also makes us well aware of the changing times. Thank you for those kind words. Item number 5, statements and announcements by the leader and members of the executive. If you just kindly just raise your hand when you wish to speak, I shall call you as and when necessary. They're all queuing up, I see. Oh, yes, that's what I just said, statements. Oh, yeah, Councillor Worth.
Thank you, Chairman. Just like to say I was hoping today to give you a report on the very first inspection by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary Fire and Rescue, quite a mouthful, which was carried out during the summer. But unfortunately, due to the minor issues that happened around the country a couple of days ago, probably understandably the Home Office decided to delay that report for another week, so it didn't clash with the various things coming out of central government and also the other issues that were coming out of being issued out central government as well. I feel that fire and rescue across the country has a very good message to bring out, and they would rather do that, hopefully in a time that's slightly less contentious. So it will now be, a report will now be coming out on Thursday the 20th of December, and I will sending a summary of that report out to all members, along with links to both the Lincolnshire report and the national report of that covers all 14 fire authorities that were inspected in the first tranche of inspections. I'd also just like to say that during the course of the year, myself and the senior officers from the fire service regularly go on a weekly basis to fire stations around the county, and we would welcome local members attending those if they wanted to. So probably in the new year I will send out a list when those inspections are, because I'm really quite keen to try and get that local link between the local member and the fire station. They are very much community-based fire stations, and they would welcome and love to see you. So we'll make sure you know when those are, and give you the opportunity to watch them in training, and they may even involve you in that as well when you come. So it'll be a bit of entertainment for all of you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Worth. Who's next on the list of the announcements? I've not a list here. No more statements. Oh, that's good. Right. Thank you very much. That's very, very brief. Right. We'll now move on to questions. I'm anxious to allow a good spread of questions across the chamber within the time allocated. I intend to allow 45 minutes for questions. I'm expecting councillors to be disciplined and because of the time available. Due to today's technical difficulties, I will call each councillor in turn according to the list in front of me. So no need to press your buttons. When you are called to ask your question, please press the large button and press it again once you have sat down and finished speaking. Thank you. And my first question is Councillor Mrs. Linda Wootton to Councillor Richard Davis. Councillor Mrs. Wootton.
Thank you, Chairman. As you've said, my question is for Councillor Richard Davis, our Executive Councillor of Highways, and it is on behalf of a resident within my division, a Mr. Paul Gadd. So will you just bear with me, Chairman, please? And he says, in view of the incident at the Boxing Day hunt meeting, Grantham 2016, when a hound was hit by a taxi, and the incident in May 2018 when 2 Beaver Hunt Limited hounds accessed the main A1 road, which resulted in 1 hound being killed. Clearly, it is difficult to control a pack of dogs in the busy traffic environment we now have, such as Grantham Town Centre, even with a road closure. Therefore, from a safety perspective, would Richard Davis agree with me that the Boxing Day meeting of the Beaver Hunt Limited would be safer on a permanent basis at the new engine room site at Beaver, where no road closure would be required? Risks, costs, organisation, liabilities, clean-up costs, parking and associated disruption would not be forced on both the ratepayers of LCC and SKDC. Beaver Hunt Limited would carry the full risk. Grantham Mayor and Hunt supporters could still attend to carry on the tradition in a safe environment. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, and thank you for the question, Councillor Wootton. I'm pleased to say, I'm proud to say that as somebody who was born and bred in Lincolnshire in a rural community, I support legal hunting, and I'm very keen to support the 135 years of tradition that have meant the Beaver Hunt have continued to hunt in and meet on St Peter's Hill in Grantham. It goes without saying, actually, that there is no evidence that there has been significant disruption. If a event can survive 2 world wars and the numerous crises that have evolved and enveloped this country over 100 years. I'm sure 20, 30 minutes on St Peter's Hill in Grantham is not a consideration that we should worry about. The fact of the matter is there is no road closure book, they haven't applied for one, and candidly to walk their hounds and horses along Grantham High Street, the A52 or in fact the A1, they don't need any permission. They are entitled to pass and bypass on the road as is seen fit. That is lawful. So it's entirely up to them. I would make the point that I think it's important that we remember how many people in Grantham do support this tradition. The beaver hunt come to Boxing Day on St Peter's Hill in Grantham for a variety of reasons, and it's always extremely well attended. I'm happy to support that. I think it does beg into question, this isn't the first time we've had issues with taxis right outside the Guildhall, and as the local member for the area, Mr Chairman, I think in the spring we ought to review whether or not that's the best place for a taxi rank in the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Our next question is Councillor Sarah Parkin for Councillor Martin Hill.
Thank you, Chairman. It's lovely to have our very own suffragettes here today, and it felt very appropriate to stand to honour that anniversary today. I would like to welcome them today. These are the Lincolnshire Lionesses and their supporters who are campaigning for pension justice for women, as we discussed at the last council meeting. Councillor Hill, I think it was quite clear in the debate last time that there was some misconceptions, some misunderstanding about why we were bringing the motion forward and why these women were campaigning. Councillor Hill, will you agree here now to meet with these women at a later date, to be able to discuss the issues with them firsthand that they face, and possibly to also apologise for any misunderstandings that were held in this chamber about the issues that they really are campaigning about? I do have some information here from them that they brought today that I'll be delighted to pass over to you in a few moments' time, and I do hope that this can be an opportunity to really genuinely listen to them and to get a full grasp of what it is they are campaigning for. This is about the way they have been communicated to. This is about government maladministration. This is not about the increase of the state pension age per se, and I think it's a good opportunity for us to be able to resolve any misunderstandings that occurred last time. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, like you, I do welcome the fact that there are women now in this chamber. I think it's a shame there are not more women in the chamber, and hopefully in the future we'll have better representation. We did have a full and thorough debate about the issues raised at your motion last time about the state pension changes to women and men, actually, but women in this particular case. And I don't think that I was under any misunderstanding of what was being discussed, and there was thorough research done in terms of what the issues were about, not least in my own household, where my wife, by chance, actually is one of the worst affected women in this, and instead of retiring at 60, she suddenly finds she's now going to be retiring at 67. I think we debated this pretty thoroughly. I think there's no need for me to apologise, because I think we were well aware of what the issue was. We were well aware there was a late change, sudden change in terms of these equalisation, if you like, because there's two issues. One is the equalisation between men and women, which I think everybody accepted, and then there was the late change by the government in 2011, I believe, to actually further extend it. I think we all sympathised with that, but I'm quite clear what the campaign was also asking for was actually for a change in government legislation, which this council felt they couldn't support, because although we sympathised, there was an issue that, on the one hand, we can't be asking for more money for things like social care, for things like potholes, at the same time asking the government to give more money. I don't believe there was any misunderstanding, but I'm very happy to meet any representatives of your group or the WASPI group if there is something I or anybody else have misunderstood. I think there is not, so I will not apologise, but always happy to receive information if people think they've got something else to tell us. Thank you.
Members of the public, this is a formal meeting. You will not disrupt it in any way, shape or form. Thank you. Our third speaker, Councillor Bob Adams for Councillor Colin Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councils up and down the country work with many partnerships and have to contend and work very well with many partnerships. This council has endured partnerships going back over many decades. Could Councillor Davey be kind enough to give this council a backdrop to the unique partnership between Lincolnshire County Council and the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust that has endured for 70 years and more at Gibraltar Point National Nature Reserve. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Adams, for the opportunity to answer your question and give a little bit more clarity. 1948, this week, our forefathers in local government took the very wise decision, a very brave decision, to enter into an arrangement with what was called the Lincolnshire Naturalist Trust in terms of a lease of land at Gibraltar Point. That became the first national nature reserve in the country. I think it's, at a time when, national debate is pretty polarised at the moment, it'd be worth just thinking about that decision and what it's led to. The Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust now operates 100 nature reserves in the county. It has 65 roadside nature reserves, 1,000 local wildlife sites. It operates on a geography that we would be envious of politically, the Humber to the Wash. It has members greater than all the political parties in Lincolnshire put together, I am sure, at over 25,000 people. And it is quite clearly an organisation that has thrived because of the partnership between this authority and themselves. And I think it is a model in terms of the way local government can work in partnership. They host the Greater Lincolnshire Nature Partnership as well. There is a phenomenal amount of good work going on. The natural environment is important to the vast majority of people in this county. And I think the work they do should be commended. And I think it is right that we commend ourselves for the partnership that we helped form 70 years ago. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Councillor Mrs Marianne Overton for Richard Davis, please. Councillor Overton.
Thank you very much. I'd like to raise the issue of road safety outside of schools. We have already got the 30-mile reduction, which is good, but should it be 20 is plenty. It was in my village in Wellbourne where we lost an 18-year-old girl outside the school. We send out deep condolences to the family and to friends also, some of whom actually witnessed the event. And thank you to the council who have already offered support to the children and to the staff at the school. And also the school have been done a huge amount. Mark Guest, as the chairman, has also brought the youngsters together, and it is a community school and is doing his best. But my question is there something more that we can do for road safety, particularly outside schools? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and a very poignant point. I would start by reiterating my deep condolences to the family and friends of the young lady concerned. It goes to a core of all of us, I think, and says what we are as humans. To lose a child in particular, I think, is something that would bring shock to most of us. The reality is, at this moment in time, I don't think I'd like to comment on the particular circumstances involving that and any other more recent events, simply because I think it's right that we give the police and the correct services time to investigate. But on the broader point, 20-mile-an-hour zones, candidly, are controversial. There is some DFT evidence now that they don't reduce accidents. I think the broader issue around schools is something we're always looking at and will continue to do so. And I think it doesn't need a blanket response. What it needs is a targeted response at each location. And absolutely, I think it's right that we look at schools in particular, as we are doing with the TRO process, and say, what's the right solution to ensure that children in and around that school are safe? And I think part of it will come through the Road Safety Partnerships approach of enforcement, engineering and education. And I think the work they do is brilliant, but I think there's more certainly that can be done on education, because we do need to educate children. While we can do engineering to a certain extent, the reality is that our young people are out on the roads and they need to be very mindful of what's going on. But we will obviously, once the reports come in from the police on this particular incident, look at it in further detail.
Thank you, Councillor. My next speaker, Councillor Julie Kelly for Mrs Patricia Bradwell.
alongside the integrated lifestyle services, what plans has the council got to tackle underlying issues, i.e. the cause rather than the symptoms? Thank you.
I assume we're talking about obesity, are we, or other health?
The obesity, physical inactivity, addiction in relation to tobacco and alcohol, the 4 strands that the council identified as a priority. My point is that I think that there are often symptoms and the causes are things such as social deprivation, inequality of opportunity, poor housing, etc.
Okay, right, thank you. Well, as you said, we are working with health on this integrated lifestyle proposal, but we have for many years done lots and lots of work with young people. We had several schemes where we had clubs where young people could go, adults could go, and the results of all that was that we were making no difference. We weren't making no difference at all. We're spending millions of pounds in areas and made no difference. The Director of Public Health has done an integrated lifestyle strategy that we've got now in Derby City and part of Derbyshire, and actually there is evidence to say what we're proposing now works. They've had some really good results, and this is about actually people having help but then looking after themselves, making decisions for themselves. This is all about, it is about young people, but it is about people with long-term health conditions, like people who probably might have a stroke, diabetes, all sorts of things like that. But we have tried doing things for a long time in this council, and actually the evidence was there, it was making no difference. Our new director has said, you know, this has worked, there's evidence over in Derby City and that is why this is moving forward. But it is moving forward as well with our GPs and health colleagues, because actually we can't do this on our own. Sometimes people need the support of medics as well. So, as I say, we need to wait and see how this works out, but we have invested in it, and hopefully, you know, we will see some difference in a year or so.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Bedwell. My next speaker is Councillor Kate Cook for Richard Davis. Councillor Mrs Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, Councillor Davis, I'm really pleased to hear that you will be looking into safety outside schools after the recent tragic deaths in not only Waltham but also Osenby. And I realise that that will be after the police investigations have been completed. And I also would like to pass on my condolences to the families. Also, unfortunately, it's about another tragedy. In light of the recent tragic death of an 87-year-old woman pedestrian following a collision involving a lorry on Southgate, which is Sleaford's High Street, as you may know, can you please assure Sleaford residents that current HGV restrictions will be re-examined to see if they can be restricted further? And whilst I recognise that local businesses and residents need to get goods delivered to them in the town centre, I would hope that given the recent fatality and also recent substantial damage to buildings in the centre of the town, such as that of the HSBC Bank, that all possible options will be considered by Highways for the future safety of our residents and the protection of our historic buildings.
Thank you for the question. Yes, it's been a bad time, hasn't it? Very sad. I think we need to be very careful around HGV usage. I think it's worth remembering that we have no powers to stop local HGVs accessing Sleaford High Street. They're allowed to, even with an HGV ban in place, they don't apply to local traffic. Sleaford itself has a fairly substantial series of two bypasses to get round, so it's pretty unlikely that the majority of the HGVs are in the middle of Sleaford when they don't want to be. That's not to say that, you know, the transport kind of in the town itself can't be improved. One of the reasons for setting up the transport boards that are going to be based on each area will be to look at these particular local issues, and very happy to take on board things like, you know, HGV traffic, residence parking, all that stuff as part and parcel of that.
Thank you, Councillor. I call on Councillor Chris Brewis. Apologies, Councillor Brewis. You should have been earlier on my list. I ticked you off, if you pardon the pun, and forgot to ask you.
I don't mind being ticked off, Chairman. Thank you very much. I think that it may be that I uniquely and maybe permanently preoccupied MPs haven't noticed in SW1 in London, but we must all have noticed how in all large towns, small towns and so on, there are more and more, should we say, gaps in the row of teeth in the retail frontage. And with high streets now in a uniquely threatened state, Colin, could you tell us what we individually and all of us collectively can do to embark and help to ensure there's a fundamental national review of the whole question of business and non-domestic rate system? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bruce, for the question. And I know that the vagaries of the rating system has particularly impacted in your area. I'm well aware from the correspondence between the MP and businesses and yourself on that matter. Firstly, as you know, the Chancellor's statement has allocated a new fund to look at the whole issue of town centres and high streets. Our officers are actually working with civil servants on the design and how that fund is going to be rolled out. So we'll have hopefully some good news on that. There's obviously work going on internally through the scrutiny process looking at the high street issues. I've been engaged with the LGA on some issues on this as well. I'm working with my district colleagues, the portfolio holders for economic development, looking at how we can support some of the what are poor offers in some of our market towns in particular. And we need to work better across the piece, and that means making sure that we can roll out pedestrianisation where it's appropriate, work on street scene where it's appropriate, but also the issues of business rates we need to be careful about, because as you know, national government wants to see local government more funded through the business rate system. So I don't want to set a hair running, because national government never seems to actually set the process in the right framework. So I think we need to have a wholesale look at this. And as for Lincolnshire, I would say it's not everywhere has got a problem. I think Lincoln has enormous vitality about it, and shops close and new ones come instantly virtually. Stamford itself, has got great buzz about it. So there are places that are working really well. So what can we learn from the places that are working well for the ones that may not be doing so good? So I think there is a great piece of work going on, more work to be done, but I certainly think the government has to set a standard and a framework, and I think they have to review all of this in terms of how they fund local government, the fairer funding review, and how we actually set the structure to help local businesses thrive in the future, because the future is going to be about local. It's going to be about the use of technology and using technology to support local businesses to trade locally. So it's a huge area of work, and there is no silver bullet that's going to solve the problem. But I certainly think that there is work that we're doing that will helpfully pave the way forward. Thank you, Councillor Beard.
Thank you, Councillor Davey, for that. My next question is from Councillor Rob Fawkes to Councillor Martin Hill.
Thank you. As some of the older schools across the county are being revitalised, will they incorporate green principles such as solar panels? And more generally, what say does the County Council have with academies on such matters? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. We do have a policy of looking at, when we do improvements to schools, and indeed currently schools, looking at the possibility of carbon reduction. As a council, we've been very successful in hitting the challenging national targets for that. There isn't a blanket policy to do any, stuff no matter what, but we do look at it on a cost-effective basis, both in terms of finance and in terms of effect on the carbon environment. So there are various schemes. It's not just about solar panels. There's lighting and switching and all that sort of thing, including, of course, solar panels. And away from schools, of course, the new fire police station down at South Park will have solar panels on it. because it's a new build and it is very cost effective to put solar panels on new buildings. So there usually are certainly preference for solar panels on new school extensions, but it's not. It's done on a case-by-case basis. In terms of academies, it's up to the governors of the academy schools whether they wish to pursue this agenda, but we are very happy to advise them, and I think we have done in the past, of the best way forward to both put these panels or these proposals in, but also access the appropriate support which is available from government.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. My next question is from Councillor Kevin Clark to Councillor Richard Davis. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Davis, recently, after waiting a month for a simple reply on an update question I sent to the Highways, and this isn't the first time I've been waiting well over a month for a simple answer, I had to contact the then Chief Executive, who disappeared shortly afterwards. Anyway, I had to contact the Chief Executive for them to actually get the answer from the Highways. The question is quite simple. Is this normal practice, or is there double standards being adapted here for different councillors?
Well, thank you for the question, Councillor Clark. I can assure you that I'm equally difficult with all members, regardless of political persuasion. Yes. The short answer is at times, yes. With over 100,000 inquiries coming in a year, it can be very difficult to get responses to councillors, in particular, as quickly as we'd like. You will have received a briefing a couple of months ago about contacting the business support officer for your particular local area manager, should you need to. They're based in the office, don't go to so many meetings, so it's easier to get a response to things. You have also been offered, and we've done it a number of occasions in your patch of ward walk, and I'm sorry you had to wait a month for what may or may not have been a relatively simple item. I don't know the detail, but it can be sometimes quite a lengthy wait to get responses to things that are complicated. But rest assured, you aren't being singled out at all, I promise, honest.
Thanks. Thank you for your reply. My next speaker is Councillor Mrs Angela Newton for Richard Davis.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Davis, I think we're all delighted to know that we've got a lot of extra money to spend on maintenance, roads maintenance, particularly potholes. And I'd like you to explain to us, if you would please, how many gangs are available to work on the potholes, and what sort of work are they doing now? And are we likely to see light at the end of the tunnel? And if so, when will we have dealt with all the backlog? Thank you.
Thank you. We have 45 gangs currently repairing potholes. They are mobile maintenance gangs which are doing the reactive work. So that tends to be the smaller patching, the small jobs, the smaller pothole repairs. Since this council adopted a highways asset management approach about 3 years, which is a proactive approach of doing areas rather than incident responses, we have started to make real inroads in terms of the quality and condition of our roads. So, for example, our A's and B's have less than 3% defects on them. The C's and the U's, I'm afraid it's over 20% currently. The reality is we have had £13.7 million of additional funding. Similarly to the amount last year, we were able to raise internally and externally. However, with between a £300 and a £400 million problem, the reality is it's not a huge amount of money against the scale of the problem. For decades here in the United Kingdom, parties of all political persuasions and colours have failed to invest in infrastructure, as our colleagues have done across the water in Europe, and as a result, a lot of our roads are in a very poor condition. Nationally, the RAC estimates that it would require about £13 billion to bring all of our roads up to the required national standard. So to answer the final part of your question, is the light at the end of the tunnel? No. It will make a difference. Our proactive approach is making a difference, and my feedback from doing ward walks and speaking to colleagues in the chamber and on all sides, just for Councillor Clark's benefit, is that people do feel like this approach is working and more work is being done in terms of bigger repairs, stopping the potholes form in the first place. The backlog still sits at several hundred reported potholes. We are getting on top of it at the high point At the end of last spring, it was over 1,000. I think, depending on how the winter goes, I'd like to think that by spring we'll be about on track for staying on top of reports as they come in. But the reality is that without significant readjustment to local government finance, we aren't going to be getting the kind of repairs that we need.
Thank you, Councillor. My next question is from Councillor Sue Rawlings to Councillor Colin Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Davey, could you please advise members regarding the Council's stance on the current debate surrounding the Agriculture Bill, specifically items such as food security, the environment, and also the role of the county farms? And how will the County Council be involved in the consultation process there too? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rawlings, for that question. Firstly, I would say I think this current Secretary of State has probably achieved more power for DEFRA than most of his predecessors. So on face value, that should be good news for Lincolnshire because of the importance of our agricultural sector. However, the bill is very, very focused on everything that the agricultural community does except for food production. So it's very concerned with improving the environment, which of course is a good thing for us, if it does not impose unnecessary constraints on our farmers, who, let's not forget, are the custodians of our land and our environment. It's also very concerned with changing the regime of farm payments. Commentators like the NFU and the CLA have told us that its proposals, and not least the pace of the change, have the risk of causing some very short-term problems, and I think that will impact on some of our county farm tenants. That could be an issue. Internally, the Environment and Economy Scrutiny Committee has already considered the agricultural bill and have asked officers to prepare an action plan in response to the bill, and that will go back in front of the committee in January. Also, I can now inform you that DEFRA have confirmed that they are to consult on a national food strategy in the spring of next year, subject to any delays, of course. It is our intention, therefore, to work with the local enterprise partnership and hold a conference to prepare a full Lincolnshire response to that consultation. And I think that will be very important, bearing in mind the gross value of the food sector to the wider Lincolnshire economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. My next question is from Councillor Robin Renshaw to Councillor Patricia Bradwell. Councillor Renshaw.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Bradwell, what can the Lincolnshire County Council do to try and prevent grammar schools in Lincolnshire undermining the work of their secondary modern colleagues by lowering the points needed for entry? Does she agree that this is a symptom of the chaos in the education system that has resulted from an academised system?
Oh, thank you for that, Councillor Renshaw. I have to say that it does worry me greatly that a very small number of our grammar schools are lowering the pass rate from 220. Earlier this year, I did write to all grammar schools asking them, you know, if they want to be true grammar schools, then they should stick to actually young people passing the test. I have to say that didn't go down very well, and I'm not probably the most popular person with some grammar school heads, but I do believe if we're truly going to have grammar school education in the county, it should be people who go into grammar schools and pass the 11 plus. Obviously, we have a couple of issues in the county at the moment, and I actually intend going to see the head teachers. I was going to write a letter, but I've decided to go and see the head teacher and the chair of governors to have a talk about, you know, why are they deciding to do this? I know that in some areas, numbers of children going to schools, and you know, with any area, we get popular schools, and that it is very difficult for schools at the moment because actually funding comes in with bums on seats. But I do think that we do need to try and work with our grammar schools as much as we can to help them if they are getting low numbers coming in. But that can't be at the end result of destabilising a secondary school which is in the same town or in the same city. So I am on the case. I'm trying to tread very carefully because we don't want to be at loggerheads with our head teachers. But it is something that we need to try and address and need to understand, you know, why governors are making such decisions.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Bradwell. My next speaker is Councillor Mrs Alison Austin for Councillor Richard Davis.
Thank you, Chairman. All right, good morning, Councillor Davis. You're obviously the flavour of the meeting. Right, on a positive note, I would like to thank you for your fleeting visit to my division in July, I think it was, and would welcome you back again, perhaps to look in greater detail about the issue I'm referring to. Whether it's with or without your young son, that's up to you. Right. My question concerns what can be done to prevent HGVs and other commercial vehicles using unsuitable residential roads, all with weight restrictions and some with speed humps, before the section of the distributor road, which will eventually connect the A52 with London Road and hence the main industrial estate until that road can be built. The local transport strategy and the new local plan envisages that this particular link will have to be mainly funded by contributions relating to one particular development, Q2 as is known, which will essentially be dependent upon one local developer. Would you consider whether some additional funding could be sourced for this section of the road and help bring forward its construction, hopefully within your lifetime, even if not within mine? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Austin, and it was a pleasure to come with you. I can assure you I won't be bringing my son again, as he insists on pointing out every pothole we arrive anywhere near. You're right. I mean, the work we're doing with Boston Borough Council, with the Boston Transport Board, with Councillor Mike Brooks, who's behind me, and also the leader of Boston Borough Council, has highlighted this as a particular concern. I almost feel like I need to declare an interest because it's a useful shortcut, isn't it, from chain link through. We absolutely need to do something about it. We have limited enforcement powers. Our only real options are engineering. You know, speed pumps can be very controversial for people that live near them because of the noise they generate. It has been highlighted as one area to look at in terms of how can we make it more difficult for big vehicles to come that way. The enforcement side is very much down to Lincolnshire Police, and I have to say they feel that they have other priorities at the moment. It's a common question, not unlike Councillor Cook's in terms of the centre of Sleaford. In terms of forward funding the next phase, that's something we're absolutely always looking to consider. I think what we would like to find out at the moment is get a response back from the Department for Transport to our bid for design money for the remaining sections of the road, and I think that will establish a pattern as to what kind of level of government support we can expect. And once we've got a response from that, hopefully in the spring we'll be in a better position to break down the problem into bite-sized chunks.
Thank you. My next question is from Councillor Nigel Pepper to Councillor Mrs Patricia Bradwell. Councillor Pepper.
Councillor Bradwell, could you give councillors an update on the Falls Response Service, which was recently announced, using £400,000 of winter pressure funding, please?
Thank you, Councillor Pepper. Yes, I would like to update councillors. We have for a while known that a lot of older people we know fall, and sometimes younger people fall if they've got silly slippers on or something like that. But it is a real problem for us in Lincolnshire, and actually a lot of these people just end up being taken to hospital by an ambulance, being there 4 hours or whatever, and then going home. So what we've decided to do is working with EMAS Lives, Community Health Trust, just trying to think of who else, Wellbeing Service, and that. There's a group of people working together, to put together a plan as how can we check people out before they go off if they don't need to go to hospital. And from next week, this full service will be working, firstly as a pilot in the East Lindsey area, because we know in East Lindsey it takes the longest to get an EMAS ambulance out there. And the service will be working 7 days a week, 8 till 8. And again, we'll, obviously with the winter precious money, that was all about keeping people out of hospital, and we're hoping the evidence will show that these people will be able to stay in their own home or go to a local hospital and receive treatment. EMAS are going to triage the 999 calls, and before, very often we've had a problem with sharing information, but we've got over that now, so they will triage the calls, and then if it's felt that the person can be looked after by Lives or somebody, or Fire and Rescue, then they will then go out and give the appropriate treatment and check that they're all right. Obviously, University of Lincoln are going to do a review of the service over these few months to see, you know, is there evidence there to say that this would be a good way of spending money on this service, and if we will then hopefully then roll it out across the county, because we do believe that lots of people are going into hospital, into A&E, and we all know that. We would all say that in this room, and that it's much better if we can treat them in their own home or locally. So I'll update, obviously, councillors again when we next have our meeting, to just tell you how it's gone over the months, over the winter months, and as I say, hopefully this will be something new that we can introduce into Lincolnshire, and I think actually nationally, if it works, other councils and health authorities will be interested in taking and moving that into their area.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Bradwell. My next speaker is Councillor Mrs Christine Talbot for Councillor Martin Hill. Councillor Mrs Talbot.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. My question is to do with the budget and the government's announcement yesterday, which allows councils to raise the council tax by 3%, and also the fact that there's going to be more funding for the police. Overall, it could add up to something like 6%, and that will be twice the rate of inflation. So I'm going to ask Martin whether he would actually agree with me that if we have to raise the council tax by a large amount, say 4 or 4.5%, will the message that goes out to the people of Lincolnshire ensure that we explain the rationale as to why we're doing it in language that the electorate understand, rather than talking to them in jargon?
Thank you, Chairman. As Councillor Talbot said, the settlement was finally received yesterday, a delay from the hoped-for announcement last week, and obviously Brexit debates in the House of Commons prevented that, but at least it's progress. We normally, the last few years, we received it just before the Christmas period. The settlement was very much in line with what was anticipated. Members will remember that this is the last year of a four-year agreement we reluctantly agreed to with the government, so we were pretty clear what was coming. There have been a few minor changes. For example, the rural delivery grant has increased by another 1.3 million on top of what is currently the case, which I believe is something like 4 million or 6 million, so that will go to 6 million, which was good news. The less good news is that we were not successful this year in being a business rate pilot. We were next year. This year we currently are one, and that is a good thing financially and otherwise. We weren't successful. It wasn't a great surprise because the government bid system was very much oversubscribed, so I think the government have tried to spread the good news across other authorities. So that was the other thing, and finally, the other thing was, of course, we have now got potential flexibility, because the current budget model, which the executive discussed earlier this month, is that we were consulting on a 3.95% increase in council tax. That's 2% from the government's adult care council tax increase and 2% from the basic council tax increase. Now appears there is possibility to add another 1% onto that, so that would take the total increase for the county council to 4.95%, something which we'll have to look at and decide with colleagues what is the best way forward. And obviously, as always, we will come to a debate in about 3 weeks' time, I think, to decide whether that's the right thing to do or not in these circumstances. In terms of the reasoning, could I point Mrs. Mrs. Talbot to actually Councillor Parker's motion, which actually does set out the reduction in funding which councils, including ours, have endured under the government, and it does explain there that we have lost a lot of government funding. At the same time, we are having to provide more services. We've got a lot of increased demand, in particular in adult care, children's health services, SEN services, and indeed waste management. So in summary, although the government has given extra money, and of course part of the settlement also, the government also confirmed that the 9 million for winter care and adult care pressures, which was given this year, will continue into next year. So that's good news as well. And indeed, of course, it was also announced we'd get £13.7 million for pothole repairs. Not sure, there's no confirmation of what will happen next year with that, but we know we've got that money for the moment. So although there have been reductions, and I think on a one-off basis, the government has helped us out quite considerably, what local government really wants, and we'll come to the debate later, is that we want to be set on a, Lincolnshire and all the rest of the councils across this country, set on a sustainable footing in the future. So instead of every year waiting for one-off handouts, if you like, we have a system which is sustainable and makes us able to provide services and fulfil the ambitions of this council to provide good services to the public.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. I've got 2 questions, so if I could ask both to be as brief as possible, we can get both in. Councillor Robert Parker for Councillor Martin Hill. Councillor Parker.
Question to Councillor Hill. Later on in this meeting, agenda item 9, we are looking at the interim arrangements for relating to the role of Chief Executive. And paragraph 1 says, on the 26th of November 2018, it was announced that Keith Ireland was leaving the employment of the council as the council's chief executive and head of paid service. Keith Ireland and yourself issued a joint statement. My question is to ask when, if at all, will any further information be revealed about the circumstances of Keith Ireland's departure?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Parker. As we are both aware, the Appointments Committee, Cross-Party Appointments Committee met a few weeks ago to discuss this matter and unanimously agreed what the best course of action was. As part of that, there has been the joint statement between myself on behalf of the Council and Mr. Ireland. I'd love to expand, and I'm sure you would, but as you're well aware, all members of the Appointments Committee have been given very strict instructions from our legal team that we are not allowed to discuss this matter in public in any form. So that is the reason why we've issued the statement, which I think believes, which I hope people understand what has happened. Basically, things weren't working and they're not likely to work. So I'm afraid beyond the statement that I have made on behalf of the Council, I am not at liberty to say any more, as indeed you are as well. Not at liberty.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. I've got one more speaker. We are out of time, so if I could ask Councillor Porky to be very brief, and again, Councillor Richard Davis, a very brief answer if we can. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's just one question. When Councillor Davis gave answer to Angela about the gangs working on potholes, you mentioned 5 gangs where on email I've got here it says there's 32 gangs working. That was just for clarification. My question is the underspend from highways, which potholes are part of, being used the following year, or could it be used for street lighting in the same year? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. In terms of the use of underspends, obviously we have to financially plan for years to come, so it would be irresponsible to use one-off underspends to fund a revenue cost which is reoccurring. Most of the underspend, we reinvest in the road. It goes into tarmac, to blacktop, to footpaths, to those things that we need to keep the county running. So no, it's not going to be spent on streetlights.
Thank you. Thank
you, councillors. I will give you all a pat on the back. You've done very well with your microphones today, so I hope it doesn't set a precedent. No. Right, straight on to item number 7, appointment of parent governor representative. According to the copy, we have Miss Alexandra Louise Inkley Sayer as a parent governor representative on the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee and the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. Be noted. Have we got a mover for that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move that.
Thank you. Have we a seconder?
Yes, Chairman, I'll second that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we need a show of hands. All those in favour of that announcement? Thank you very much. Any against? Any abstentions? Very good. Thank you very much, members. Item number 8, Joint Municipal Waste Management Strategy. A report by the County Commissioner for Economy and Place has been circulated, and I call on Councillor Eddie Pole to move. Councillor Pole.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. In moving this, may I first of all congratulate Councillor Renshaw on an absolutely amazing tie. I mean, I'm looking forward to getting a tune out of that over lunch. Yeah. But I thought I'd go for the restrained view this morning. But I'd also like to thank all the members and officers, and particularly the members of the public who responded to the consultation on the Joint Municipal Waste Management Strategy that is before you today, and let you know that most of the collection authorities have already considered this, and it has been approved without exception. I think it's been a very interesting and very enjoyable piece of work to bring forward, and the spirit of cooperation and collaboration that exists around that table these days is something to behold, Jim. So I commend the report to the Council and hope that you adopt it.
Thank you, Councillor Pole. Is there a seconder for that at the moment?
Thank you, Chairman. Happy to second that.
Thank you. I have two speakers. Councillor Mrs Talbot first. Councillor Mrs Talbot.
Once again, not obeying instructions. It's Christmas. Let's have a bit of fun. On Monday night, I attended Waddington Parish Council meeting, only to be lectured by a colleague district council about the fact that people should not be mixing glitter cards with ordinary cards, because if their glitter cards are in with the ordinary cards, the bin gets contaminated. I did not expect to be a criminal, but on Tuesday I opened a card from a colleague, and it ended up tipping glitter all over the work surface, all over the floor, and I cleared it up. Later, I went to cut the stamp off the said envelope, and the same thing happened again. On Wednesday, I bought myself a glitter dress. It was very pretty, but when I tried it on, the glitter went all over the bedroom, all over the bed. I'm sorry to embarrass you, darling, but I'm going to say that. I'm talking to Milburn, not Barry. I was away in Glenfield overnight, celebrating, maybe a year late, the fact that Glenfield, East Midlands Children's Congenital Heart Hospital at the moment, although they're not quite meeting the standard of 500 operations a year. Unbeknown to me, there was so much glitter that when I tried to get hold of Milburn the next morning to tell him what time I'd be arriving home, no answer to the phone. He eventually answered the phone, and he was in the shower. He'd just got out of the shower, and he said to me,
Very much information.
oh no, it's really funny. And he said to me, thank you so much. He said, I had to have a shower this morning because I was covered in glitter when I got out of bed. I wasn't even there. So my question to Councillor Pole is, don't worry, Eddie, I'm not going to embarrass you. I've known you since I was 18. I could go on about Ramworth Country Club, but I won't. However, I would like to know if this is a problem, because obviously my attention has been drawn by a fellow councillor who sits on NKDC. Do you not think, Councillor Pollitt, more appropriate that the electorate should know that we're not meant to put glitter cards, whether it's gold glitter, red glitter, white glitter, whatever, in with other cards, because you could actually contaminate? And what happens is the glitter gets stuck to the rollers and, you know, makes a right... they've got so much glitter on them, they can't be used to separate the different recycling components. And as Christmas is just about a week away, and Epiphany is on the 6th of January, when people will be making their Christmas lists for next year and then chucking them in the cards that they don't need in the bin, and then we've got a problem. So I'd like to know how we're going to communicate the fact that residents should not be putting glitter cards in their bin or glitter from anywhere else.
Can you answer that, Councillor Pole? Okay. I have another speaker, Councillor Renshaw.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, there's one thing about it. The recycling rates in the county are going to go up when we finish business today. Judging from the lack of debate at our executive when I attended just recently, it's expected that this will go through on the nod with little or no comment. Much of this will be or due to little or no reading of the papers. So let's go on the nod and get on with our Christmas lunch. I'm only joking. When government devolved the arrangements for recycling, it abdicated its leadership. It's no good leaving it to residents to decide what goes in what bin, glitter or otherwise. It needs instruction based on clear guidelines and uniformity across certainly all of Lincolnshire and the UK. Green in some areas for garden, but recycle in others is a nonsense. It's clear that contaminated recycling vehicle loads cost us all. And I see it daily in the deprived wards that I represent, with lots of waste bins blocking the footway every day to save residents time in presenting for collection. Education of residents must start in schools and nurseries and takeaways. However, we need to value and support the work of the Waste Partnership, and I certainly do in Lincolnshire, and recognise that the strategy is not cast in stone, but is a work in progress document. I support all the objectives, which I'm sure is shared across the chamber, but changes cost cash, so these changes require changeover flexibility. If this is not just to be words, then resources to carry out the strategy will be required, and it is our legacy that we provide them. Ice caps melting and plastic epidemics in the oceans will not stop just because Lincolnshire wants an underspend. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Renshaw. My next speaker is Councillor Mrs Overton.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is a really important document because it influences our carbon footprint and our impact on this planet. I spoke this week in Stuttgart, or close to Stuttgart, on the issue because I think many of you will know that the UN has had another look at their scientific figures, and the, if I get the phrase right, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, that's the IPCC, which you would have heard about on the press, have pointed out that at the current rate, we are going to destroy almost all of our coral reefs and displace hundreds of millions of people by 2050. That might seem a long way away, but if we don't start now, it really is a doom scenario. What they've reckoned on their new calculations is that the Paris Agreement said well less than 2% increase in, well less than 2 degrees temperature increase was required. They now say it's got to be 1.5 degrees rise in temperature as a maximum. So that means we have to do more. And that's why this is a really important document. If you look at the recommendations on page 116, It is hugely about consider, explore opportunities, to seek, to find, to make an objective, to review, to consider. I would like to have seen, let's do it. Let's improve our targets. Let's actually do something about waste minimisation, not just explore, let's actually do it. There is a lot of work going on, and I'd have liked to have seen this a lot more concrete, building on what's already happening. We've put seek to reduce our carbon footprint, but no targets there. And that could be in line with what local government across the whole of Europe is working on, and that's to be carbon neutral by 2050, and some are going for 2030. I'm really pleased to hear from Councillor Hill earlier that he feels we have met our carbon targets by this council. If that's right and that's genuine, and I'm sure it is genuine, but I mean if it includes things like making sure we're not just burning waste unnecessarily and recycling wherever possible, then I think we're in a good position to lead the rest of the community. Can we not get a carbon neutral Lincolnshire by 2030 and have that as a target that we can all work together towards and succeed? So one of the ways I'd like to see is to have more local facilities, and I think that would be very helpful so that we're not just reliant on the big ones. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Overton. My next speaker is Councillor Rob Parker. Councillor Parker.
Two points that I'd like to make. I'd like Christine Talbot, she was talking about a parish council. I went to a meeting of Lincolnshire Labour Party, and this question came up. I raised it because I was talking about the Lincolnshire Waste Strategy. And one of the issues that I raised was on page 111, which sets out each of the 7 district areas, and it shows the household waste reused, recycled and composted. And because it was across Lincolnshire, I took the opportunity to put a question, which is the same question that I'm putting to Eddie Pole and to all of us really, is how come that we have such big disparities between different district councils in Lincolnshire? The figures show that the best performing in terms of household waste reused, recycled or composted is West Lindsey at 46% and South Holland at 27.2%. Now, it seems to me that there is a fundamental issue here when we've got a gap of 18% between top and bottom, and median ones, City of Lincoln, Boston, and other high-performing ones like North Kesteven. And it seems to me to be a fundamental issue which I think could be recognised outside of this meeting, probably through scrutiny work, as to identify why West Lindsey are achieving so much and why South Holland are not. And that's close to home, isn't it, Councillor Pole? I say that nicely. So that's my first question. The second question is, and is linked to it, is about how do we manage to follow on from what Councillor Overton said about this notion of thinking globally but acting locally. Because we know some of the big issues that we're facing as a world, and we have to translate that into action locally. And it does seem as though the opportunity to do that is apparent. We have the opportunity by using these figures. And I'd be looking, in a sense, for outside of this waste strategy, because in a sense, any document that's 160 pages long must be important. I've realised that from previous council meetings. But it does seem as though the essence of it has got to be captured about how much improvement we could make if not only could we improve all councils, but improve the least well-performing ones up to, I say council areas really, it's individual people, council areas to the 46% that West Lindsey are achieving. Now, what messages can we extract from that to put practically into action is something I think we're all interested in.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. My next speaker is Councillor Mrs Jackie Brockwell.
Brockwell.
Brockway, sorry.
Brockway. How long have you known me? Thank you, Chairman. I think this is an absolutely stunning piece of work, and I really would like to express my appreciation to all those who took part. It's wonderful on so many levels. I mean, the moment I found the word putrescibles in here, my day was made. Putrescibles. I mean, it's what a word! What a wonderful word. It's not just that it gives us the policy going forward in the future to take account of all these things that members have been raising, but it's very educative. It's extremely useful for me as a councillor because it gives me not just the information of my division, but comparative districts. And going forward, this will be in my library of information for several years. It's very easy to read. So, I mean, I can't praise it enough. I think it's important when we're looking at things like this, sometimes, even if we're enthusiastic about things like recycling, it's difficult to be as helpful as we can because we don't always know the question is there to ask. Sometimes you have to have fairly extensive background knowledge or have that available knowledge to look at it before you can ask the incisive questioning. And I think that what this report is going to do is to give me that facility much more than I've had previously. I'm very pleased that we're looking at reuse rather than just recycling. There used to be a most wonderful facility over in Skegness, which was the Seagull Recycling Centre, and you paid your £10 a year and you could go along, take a shopping trolley round and take whatever you wanted several times a year. So as somebody who had a children's theatre company at the time, that little recycling centre provided more costumes than you can ever imagine. So we're looking at things that are hugely helpful and supportive to areas of the community that might not be at first obvious. But when you look at the way the policy is set out, I can see ways that it'll enable those little things to happen once again. So they're little individually, but overall they have a big impact for people who are trying to push things forward in their locality. One thing I have to harp on about, oh yes, the other thing, I did notice too the information that it gave me was comparative work between my own district, for instance, where I live, and the practices in the other districts, which now I will go back to my own district and ask about. So very, very important. The one thing I would say when it comes to recycling and saving energy, I have discovered the joys of the second generation smart meter, and I have to say to everybody, it saves a fortune in power usage. Get out there and have a look at it. Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you very much, Councillor Paul, for all the work.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Brockway. My next speaker, Councillor Martin Hill. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chairman. Briefly, I would support most of what Councillor Renshaw said. Waste minimisation, which we all know is the best way forward, is really a matter for national government. It's very difficult for local councils to do that without a lot of expense and controversy. So I think that's where it needs to be. And I think current government, rumours coming from government, what might be the next policy is a concern, I think. I would also agree with him, he did refer to the paper copies, 85 pages we've all been circulated with. I think it's something we need to look at as group leaders. We've already agreed as group leaders that we would minimise papers going to committees, and we've all got electronic equipment. I know there is an issue about making sure that when we're debating big policies that everybody's aware, but I do think we need to look at the next group leaders meeting, and that's up to fellow councillors. Are you happy not to have 85 pages and just rely on your electronic equipment to look at the policies? And I think it's something we perhaps need to look at again, because we can't spout on about carbon footprints at the same time as printing out hundreds of pages. I think the other thing I would say is that it's quite interesting. People say, well, you mustn't burn it, you must recycle it. I think we've got to think about the carbon footprint, never mind about the cost. Because frankly, whatever you do, the very act of recycling, never mind about the transport of recycling, has a carbon footprint. And it is actually nonsense to actually do something which actually attempts to reuse something, which frankly all we need to do is put it in the incinerator, which actually in itself is recycling, because all that does is create energy which can be used for electricity. So we have issues like with the coffee cups and Walker's Crisps, for example, who are saying we're going to collect all these things up. We can't recycle, we know, because they've got the plastic coating. And actually, I think, I'm not 100% sure, that if you just burn them, that's the best way you can minimise the carbon footprint. So there's a lot of gesture politics goes in a lot of this, and I think let's just focus on what's right for the environment and what's genuinely right for the environment. So I think I would certainly, though, commend the paper and all the very hard work that Councillor Poll's put into this, because it's not been easy to get everybody round the table. We've had various waste portfolio holders over the years, and they've all struggled to get everybody on the same page, and Eddie has done a tremendous amount of work doing that, and I can't praise him enough for the patience and the forbearance he's shown to get everybody on the right page to all agree to this document.
Thank you. My next speaker is Councillor Fido. Unless you had a point of order, Mrs. Holbert.
I certainly do.
Oh,
Sorry, Councillor Fido. Radio Lincolnshire is very informative, isn't it? Because this week they had a gentleman on who actually is, I don't know where the collection points are here in Lincolnshire, but they're certainly collecting the crisp packets. And I don't know where the company is. I think it's called TRL. They are then shredded, washed, and makes into pellets, and he's producing garden furniture out of used crisp packets. I can't remember where, but there are collection points in Lincolnshire. So I advise everybody, don't put it in the bin, put it in these collection points.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Talbot. And I'll bring Councillor Fido in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So, first of all, I do think it's absolutely right that we're doing much, much more to be environmentally conscious. I applaud the efforts of TV programmes like Blue Planet that have gone to increase public awareness into reducing plastic use. And I also applaud the efforts that this government has actually made in, for example, banning single-use plastics, microbeads in many products as well, hopefully banning wet wipes as well, because having used to work for the water company as well, Anglian Water, seen the damage that they can cause in our sewers through expansion and fatbergs and among other things like that. And I think much, much more needs to be done in education. Because, I mean, when I was at school, we learnt about the 3 R's: recycling, reusing and reducing. And I mean, you know, Councillor Parker was absolutely spot on in what you were saying about the rates of recycling, some of which in this county are absolutely shocking. A lack of joined up thinking about what can go in recycling bins across the county, when in many cases they're going to the same central point anyway. I really like Councillor Brockway's point about reusing plastics, such as, you know, reusing our shopping bags when we go shopping, although I always forget to put mine in the boot of my car anyway. And reusing things like plastic cartons, you know, Muller Corners, for example, other yogurts are available, are amazing for, you know, using as plant pots for, you know, before you take your plants outside and put them into a bigger pot. I've seen many things that have been reused when I've done work with National Citizen Service. For example, at Monks Abbey Primary School, many things were reused there into a sensory garden, an activity garden out the back there. But also reducing the amount we use in the first place. I think so much can be said for actual reduction in the first place. Many leading coffee shops on the high street now actually give you discount if you bring your own reusable coffee mug. It's something that saves me a fair bit of money. And things like bottle banks as well. I don't know if anyone here has been to Germany, but one of the things that's widespread in Germany is you've got bottle banks that you get a couple of cents back on the euro for when you take bottles back in the first place. And I don't know if that's something that this government, if we can try and campaign on as well, in order to try and champion the reduction of plastics in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. You're obviously not as old as me, because I can remember getting tuppence and then it went up to threepence back on a bottle of lemonade, so yeah. Councillor Brewis, we've got you on the list, Councillor Brewis.
I have to say, Matthew Fido said a bit of what I was going to say, but I can remember when I was a student, which wasn't yesterday, but was quite a long time ago, 3 young people walked around Durham the day after Miners' Gala, and bearing in mind it was a penny for a little one and tuppence back on big bottles, they collected enough empty bottles and made themselves 10 quid in old money. But it just strikes me that, and I see that enormous, horrible fat ball that was taken out of the sewers is now going into a museum as an exhibit, which I think says something about the 21st century. But what gets me, He's mentioned about Germany, and it is. You recycle them and you get a token or an ability to get the money back. To my mind, the one way we could really address the whole business, if we built houses to the standard they do in the Netherlands, Germany, and all of Scandinavia, we could shut all our power stations down tomorrow because they don't leak all their energy out into the atmosphere.
Thank you, Councillor Brewis. I think that's our final speakers, unless there are any more. I will ask now Councillor Pole to respond to that odd question or two. Thank you, Councillor Pole.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to say there was a lot more in that than I was expecting. Yeah, there's a lot of things, isn't there? People keep talking about not embarrassing me and then go ahead and embarrass me, so I guess I can live with that. Glitter cards. Strangely enough, we did the press release about glitter cards and wrapping paper a couple of days ago, Christine, so we were already on that one. And I think what you're saying is absolutely quite right. If in doubt, put it in the black bag. Yeah, don't put it in recycling because it just causes more problems if you put it in recycling. So a rule of thumb, my colleague down in South Holland says, you know, if you take your wrapping paper and you scrunch up in a ball, if it springs back out, put it in the waste bin. If it stays scrunched up in a ball, put it in recycling. And that's a pretty good rule of thumb for deciding what can and can't be recycled with Christmas wrapping paper. Councillor Fido, when you got on about pot plants, I was thinking, oh, younger generation, they'll never learn. And then realised you meant plants you grow in pots. So... sorry. Sign of a misspent youth, I guess. And when you come to recycling, I mean, you know, you're absolutely right. There's so much political correctness around the recycling world these days. You need to do as much, don't do as much research as I've done because it will drive you mad. But there's some really interesting stuff out there. If you look at the carbon emission per calorie of fuels that you would consider to be really harmful, coal, nobody wants to burn coal these days, and what's considered to be the modern trend of being carbon neutral, wood, compare the carbon emissions per calorific value of the two, and you'd be very surprised. And when you look across the piece, you look at all the other fuels we use for heating and transport, and the variations are huge. There's just so much hype around recycling. There is somebody out there who I get on with really quite well, who has a view that you can recycle absolutely everything. Well, you probably can, but at what cost? A, financially, and B, to the environment. There are some things that just are not worth either environmentally or economically to recycle. And we've been trying to be very careful about what we promote in the future, and which is why the waste strategy is a little bit woolly. I agree, it is a little bit woolly. It's the action plan that's a really important part of the waste strategy. And the action plan is the things that we will do, the things that we will have researched to find out whether they're worth doing, both environmentally and economically, and striking that balance to move forward to try and reduce the waste we produce as a country. So that involves lobbying government to bring in packaging restrictions and all that sort of stuff, and how we can recycle, what products we can recycle, and move that forward. And at the end of the day, one of the biggest uplifts in recycling problems and waste production has been our change in shopping habits. You think about it, if you go to the high street and buy a box of glasses to put on the Christmas table, they come home in a box and you're very careful with them. But if you buy them over the internet, which most people do these days, they come enormously well wrapped, because the last thing the seller wants to do is for you to be on the phone saying they arrived broken. So our change to internet shopping has produced an awful lot of waste packaging that we would not normally have had if we still used the shops, and that may solve some of Councillor Davies' problems with shops closing in the high streets. As with all things around the world, most of the problems, we've made them. So it's now up to us to try and sort them out. So I think that's about it, really. That's all I had to say. I'm glad you have. Thank you very much for those comments, Martin. I really appreciate that. Yeah. I think Robin and I we're going to start a textile recycling business just after the lunch break. But it's not just me. It's everybody. Everybody who's been involved in the production of this waste strategy has got together and worked and put old animosities aside and tried to look for a more friendly future. That's both for the environment and for the economy. So I thank you all.
Can I just
Thank
offer
you.
a personal explanation as well, just for the records, for any discerning other councillors and members of the public? I do not partake in the dealing, supply or consumption of exotic tobacco. Thank you, Councillor Pole.
Thank you, Councillor Fido, for that clarification. I have a better idea for recycling Councillor Pole's tie. Probably like to donate it for the chairman's charity. We can auction it off. Thank you. Right, we need now to take a vote on those this waste management strategy. So all those in favour, please show. That looks pretty convincing. All those against, and all those abstaining. Thank you very much, members. Item number 9, interim arrangements relating to the role of Chief Executive and Head of Paid Service. A report by the Chief Legal Officer and Monitoring Officer has been circulated, and I have Councillor Hill, which will move this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. We are required to have a Head of Paid Service, and obviously the Council is also required to appoint that Head of Paid Service. In the light of recent events, Debbie Barnes has agreed to be the said Head of Paid Service, so I'm now asking the Council to agree that, and the other recommendations is in terms of returning officer for elections for this County Council, and obviously the subsequent constitutional changes. While I'm talking about this issue, I could also update the Council on the other issues which the Appointments Committee have been dealing with recently, which is the appointment of directors. And we'll recall that it was we decided to actually increase the number of directors by 1. So we were recruiting recently a director of commercial director, a director of place to replace Richard Wills, and a director of resources to eventually replace Pete Moore when he retires later next year. So I'm pleased to report that we had a fairly successful recruitment exercise, which was actually done in-house. So we didn't do what most councils do these days and go out to consultants, and I think I would like to praise the team who actually did that. They did an excellent job, and all the candidates who came and approached us were very impressed by the way it went and what a professional and welcoming thing it was for them. So successfully, we believe, subject to some final checks, etc., that we have successfully recruited a commercial director who was very impressive on interview, so let's hope that bears out. And we also a future director of resources, who again was young and seemed very ambitious and had a pretty wide scope in terms of the future. We weren't able to agree on the director of place, but Andy Gutherson has agreed to be the interim director while the council decides what to do. So in terms of that, my intention is that we'll get those 5 people in place in March time when the new ones come in. And currently we also have Debbie Barnes and what's his name? Glenn Garrett, who are currently in post and doing a very good job. So there will be a team of 5. So I think my intention, subject to the agreement of colleagues, is that we run with that new team without a chief executive for the interim, and then later on next year we'll come back to the council with a view to what the longer term arrangements are. But I think getting the 5 new people working as a team together is a priority, and probably will work better as they, as a team, directly relate to the leadership of this council.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Have we a seconder for that?
I'd like to second Martin Hill's proposition. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Mr Talbot, did you want to come back? Okay. Okay. Councillor Mrs Overton then first. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This does seem to be a solution. I was very sorry to hear that Keith Ireland had left after such a short period. And I have to say that I did find in my work with him, which wasn't anything like as much as others, that he was genuinely working hard for Lincolnshire, and I did feel he was doing his very best to get the best outcomes for our residents. So I was sorry to see him go, but I wish Debbie well, and I'm sure she'll do the best possible job, so appreciate that. And also, I'm very, very pleased to see that the commercial director is coming forward, bearing in mind that we have a 7.8 billion gap nationally, and I can't remember the figure for Lincolnshire, but there'll be one, which we have got where we do not have the funds to do the job we need. I do think that we are having to go towards the approach of being more commercial so that we can bring the funds in to make sure that we can run our services successfully. I'm sure also that they will all be, any projects will be with a very sound business case and not something that's anything else, but very clearly a success for our council, which will help our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Overton. And I'll bring Councillor Mrs Talbot in.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, it gives me great pleasure to support this recommendation, especially the part in relation to our own Debbie Barnes. I first met Debbie in 2003-04 when I was the chairman of the Education Overview and Scrutiny meeting, or committee, and we had a meeting with Debbie over in Gainsborough, and she was at that time, she was the manager of the Sure Start project, and it had just been recognised as the best Sure Start project in the country. At that meeting, 2 members of staff no longer with us, well, they're alive, but, you know, they're no longer working here, was the Assistant Director of Education, Sue Milton, and Colin Merry, who was Head of Early Years. We saved money by all going in one car, weren't we good? But on the way back, I just turned to Sue Milton and I said, that young lady eventually will be the Director of Education. Well done, Debbie.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Talbot. Right, as I see no further speakers, we need to take a vote on that. Please show if you're in favour. That looks pretty conclusive. Any against? And any abstentions? 1 abstention. Moving on to item number 10, motions on notice submitted in accordance with the Council's constitution. Members are reminded of the rules of debate. These are set out below. Now, as an amendment to this item has been received, I propose that we suspend council procedure rules for this item only, so that there can be 1 debate. And can we have a seconder for that?
I'm pleased to second that proposal, Mr Chairman.
Thank you, Mr Vice Chairman. And I ask Councillor Parker to proceed.
I'll begin by seeking some clarification because I've got 2 pieces of paper here and I just want... There's the Labour motion in full. Sorry. So, is that clearer? Yes. So, I've got a piece of paper, 2 sides, with an amendment added to it, okay, as though it is accepting all of the preamble, and another one which is just this. Now, is that the motion, are you deleting all the rest of the Labour Group motion and leaving that? Or, as I hope, adding 5 lines to the Labour motion?
Right, Chairman, what should be the case is, just for clarification, that the motion, not the preamble, because there are some bits we disagree. So what the proposal is, when it gets to calling on the government to, and it will be deleting truly end austerity in local government and replacing it with the words address the situation through as we get. So it is deleting some of the original motion.
But that deletion leaves the first page intact.
Yes, but that we are talking about the actual motion. We're talking about, I mean, we will disagree with parts of the amendment, so some of those verbally we will disagree with. My understanding is we are, the only bit we are debating in reality is the actual motion, but I'm happy to take advice.
Apparently you can't alter the preamble according to the executive.
The amendment doesn't relate to the preamble. The
amendment
relates to the motion only.
Sorry. Yes, the amendment relates to the motion only. Is that clear, everybody?
It does not mean necessarily, I'll say that later, that we agree with all the words in the preamble, although we agree with some of them.
Just for clarification, and I know this is becoming a bit tedious, and I don't want that to sound, but if we were looking to deleting words, if, you know, generally speaking in a motion, accept section 1, 2, 3, 4, delete, etc., are we saying that the 3 bullet points towards the end of the motion, towards the end of the wording, are the 3 bullet points that are being removed?
Well, I am referring to the motion in bold, but yes, we would, and I'll make that clear, if we want to do that, we would not support those 3 bullet points.
Right, because I think that we're agreeing as a council, not, I know this is a technicality, with all of the first bit. No. No, so is it you're saying delete
Chairman,
everything?
point of order. Councillor Parker appears to be the only one that's got that piece of paper that he's holding. Is that something that is his piece of paper, or
No.
is it something that should have gone to the whole council?
Sorry, no, this isn't my piece of paper. This is the piece of paper which includes everything that's in the green paper, plus the Conservative motion. And it gets as proposed by Councillor Hill, seconded by Councillor Whittington. That's the piece of...
To be able to move on, Chairman, we'll actually amend the whole preamble and the motion as well. So we're all clear what we're doing. Is that fair? Yep, I'll do that now. But obviously, let Councillor Parker then speak.
Right. Okay, fine. The reason that we've moved this motion is to look to the future of local government, not only in England as a whole, but also in Lincolnshire. And in one sense, there's a lot that could be said about the period from 2010 to 2019. And we have captured some of the issues that have been translated into finance. So looking at the Labour motion, we have taken advice from people in the finance department, and what we've come up with is some identification of just how much the impact has been on Lincolnshire County Council since 2010, and that's set out very clearly. And it's of use, it really is of use, to when people say and talk about services, we can say that between 2011-12 and now there's been an average reduction of £93 million per year into Lincolnshire. Now, that is important, it's a starting point, because it raises the question of what sort of local government do we want in Lincolnshire? Do we want the equivalent of local administration, which is really no more than following exactly what the government wants us to do, and as the Permanent Secretary to the Treasurer, Permanent Secretary of the Department of Housing, Local Government, said, she said, Melanie Mayer said that we can make sure and ensure that local councils can deliver minimum services. Now, if that's the extent of the aspiration that central government is setting to local government, it is a long, long way from actual local government. It's much more about local administration. I think that it is important that we, at this point in time, as we come to the end of the 4-year review of local government finance, that we make it clear where Lincolnshire stands. And Lincolnshire, along with many other authorities, has been impacted seriously by austerity, and no service has been left untouched. We think back to some of the things that we used to do, and we have to raise the question, we're arguing, whether or not we want to see some of the services that have gone to be reinstated. I mean, do we want to see youth services operating in our towns, Lincoln, in the villages, East Coast, the Fens? Do we want to see youth clubs actually having a life? Because at the moment, they are not funded by this council. We challenge the idea that has been said by the Chief Secretary to the Treasury about the not making cuts to local government. So we are actually recognising that central government and local government are two distinct elements. We are in local government, and we want to see central government, which is the main distributor of finance. We want that to get across the point to them that we want to see a different form of local government going forward. If this argument about austerity is that it is over, then there needs to be a new settlement between central and local government as to what is going to be the future. We cannot have the situation where everybody is waiting with bated breath to an extent for the announcement each December about how much money we're going to get. There needs to be an agreement at the beginning of each term of a new government as to what they're going to finance local government for, so that we are in control of our own spending. And that has got to be delivered at a level that meets the needs of local people. Now, it's going to be distributed differently according to political issues. It's going to be distributed differently to the needs of a particular community. But the starting point is that we want to get across funding pressures on the one level, what we think that is the amount of money that we need in order to deliver a variety of services, particular emphasis on adult social care, particular emphasis on children's services, and we also have to take into account the need to redistribute money currently being allocated under the fairer funding. But it's not only a question of whether or not cities, counties or districts should get different amounts of money. It's about what should be the size of the pot, because that's in fact more important than the internal distribution. That's why we put across our arguments with a preamble which set out details about how much money that Lincolnshire County Council has had reduced, and putting forward proposals about a plan which actually says that we need more money. Now, the amendment that's been put forward is in part the part of our argument. Yes, we do accept the council leader should write to the various leading national politicians. Funding pressures are important. We do want the government to address the situation through fairer funding, adult social care and local government funding review, but we would want it to go further, and that is about getting a settlement that is the length of a parliament so that we can plan securely. We also need to be putting forward what we think is what that settlement should be about, and it should be about delivering the sort of services that local people want. That's why we moved our amendment in the first place, and I still commend it to you.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Have we a seconder for that?
Thank you, Chairman. In seconding this motion, I want to keep our eyes firmly fixed on the future. This motion is not about what services we used to run for the sake of political nostalgia, but it's about what our communities need here and now. And there's abundance of evidence to suggest what we need. It's also about re-establishing the mandate for local councils to be powerful agents of transformation locally as democratically elected and accountable bodies. And in Lincolnshire, we really need to do that. The Social Mobility Commission in 2017 said the worst performing areas for social mobility are no longer in the city areas, but remote and coastal areas, and we have discussed that at a previous council meeting. That report showed huge disparity between our own districts, and you would be forgiven to think that we were not even the same county. In regards to social mobility, North Casteverton, East Lindsey and Lincoln ranked 29th, 227th and 259th out of 324 districts nationally. You can see massive variation there in opportunities for our people. Other evidence in regards to the need to reclaim the local authority role is found in abundance in the Public Health England profile for 2018. These profiles are, and I quote directly from the document itself, designed to help local government and health services understand their community's needs. I feel that we well understand those needs and we discuss them all of the time, but what can we actually do about all of them unless we get adequate funding to meet those needs? The facts from the profiles speak for themselves. Life expectancy is 7.25 and 5.5 lower for men and women in the most deprived areas than the least deprived. The data for Lincolnshire shows that we fare significantly worse for cardiovascular disease, physically active adults, excess weight, maternal smoking at birth and GCC results. Additionally, districts have their own discrete issues. East Lindsey fares badly for under 18s conceptions and its diabetes levels are some of the worst nationally. We know we have a huge population of those aged 65 plus and increasing issues of rural isolation. I believe the case is more than made for made here for us all to be able to support this motion. The ways we could help are endless: smoking cessation, health referral schemes, health walks, re-establishing a youth service, investing in a public transport scheme designed to promote physical and mental well-being while supporting economic development. My own personal belief is that each one of us in this chamber is united in doing the very best for Lincolnshire. I also believe that we know that we face challenges as a county that we cannot currently meet. I do not believe that that is due to a lack of ambition, desire or talent. I think the worst regrets in life are not what we do, but the things that we are never able to do. And I hope that we can unite in supporting this motion in an attempt to raise our game, re-establish our role and give the people of Lincolnshire the very best that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parkin. Could I ask you both to switch your mics off, please? That's all right, don't worry. You're doing pretty well. I have a speaker, Councillor Brewis, before I bring in Councillor Hill. You want to... Oh, right, okay. Councillor Hill, have you an amendment?
Yes, Chairman, right. Well, subject to... I mean, I know that Councillor Parker is usually very careful with getting his facts verified, so I just want to check from Pete Moore while he's here. And the second paragraph, it refers to the councillors lost, in effect, 745 million. I'm assuming that, does that take account of the one-off funding that comes in now and then? Because if that, it doesn't take account of that. It does, but you're happy that is an accurate figure. Okay. Well, I can't, I mean, I'll leave you to deal with that. So, right, so our amendment then, revised amendment, sorry to make a meal of this in a sense. Okay, turn to page 6 then. So we are talking about the preamble that Councillor Parker and Councillor Parkin have produced. Go down to paragraph 6. So the amendment will now read, we go down to independent assessments of government spending show that this is false, full stop. Then delete all those other paragraphs after it up to we therefore move that. And then obviously before then, and then replace that with, so it will read, independent assessments of government spending show that this is false. And insert, however, we also note that the additional one-off funding made by government to councils in recent years. Then we revert back to we therefore move that, and then all the black there that Councillor Parker has written, we're agreeing, but you would then delete truly end austerity in local government and replace that with the wording which you've already got. I hope that's clear. It's not clear. Why is it not clear? How can I help? Okay, too quickly done. Right. So let's start at the bottom. So we've got, we're deleting on the black bit at page 7. We are deleting the final 5 words there, 6 words. Truly end austerity in local government. Delete those words and replace them with the words which you have already got, which is council government to address the situation through fairer funding, adult social care and local government funding reviews throughout that year. And by your speech, Councillor Parker, I'm assuming you are accepting that, but we'll see. But on the preamble, which you're now saying you wish to be included as a formal motion, if you like, get down to paragraph 6 on page 6. When it gets to the word false, stop there and delete everything on the rest of page 6 there. That all goes and is replaced by, however, we also note the additional one-off funding made by government to councils in recent years. Okay? And then obviously the amendments as we've previously proposed on the black. So if we're all clear on that, if not, come back to us in a minute. Could I just say I'll speak now to my to our amendment. I very much welcome the support that the Labour group are making to the various campaigns to government, and it's no secret that all of local government, and particularly this council, have been lobbying government for some time now to actually address the situation of the shortfall in funding which we are continuing to have to endure, and the fact that, as I've said previously, it's not just a matter of reduced funding or even flat funding. There is the bigger issue of increased demand which somehow has to be paid for. And I'm pleased to report to the council that so far that the campaign has been very successful, and certainly with the new Secretary of State and indeed the Minister for Local Government, Rishi Sunak, we've been getting a very sympathetic reception, and indeed, as I've reported to the Council before, the fair funding paper was actually very much in line with what we would have hoped for as a Council. So I think it is appropriate. I'm very happy to write to those individuals, further making the point that we have these issues, and I'll say the indications are positive, but that doesn't mean to say the end result will be positive, because certainly in terms of fairer funding, if we gain, others will lose, but that's something I think we as a council should promote. But also, if the government does really need to come forward with its green paper, which unfortunately has been delayed yet again, to actually how it is going to fund adult social care and now children's services sustainably in the future. And I think everybody accepts just piling extra bits on council tax is not a sustainable solution. So hopeful that when all this comes to a head, and when all the technical work is done, and when the government makes some announcements next year, I think by this time next year, or earlier than this time next year, we will be quite clear as to what the new funding landscape will look for all councils, including ourselves, and indeed we'll hopefully have an idea of how long the government is going to propose the next tranche of comprehensive spending review as beyond 2020. So I welcome the support, and hopefully that our amendment will be accepted, and then I can write and just reinforce all the hard work that this council and other councils have done to make sure that councils like Lincolnshire do get a fair share of the cake and are able to provide those services which we all know we have to provide. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. I've now Councillor Mark Whittington. Councillor Whittington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, broadly happy to and thank the Labour Group for this motion. Unfortunately, I've got a slight issue with on the second paragraph on page 6, the average reduction of £93 million per year. Whilst factually correct to the extent that it's 945 divided by 8, what that figure fails to take into account is over the same amount of time, this council has also received £61 million in increases to council tax, £16 million council tax fund surpluses, and £122 million increase business rates. So therefore, I believe, Mr. Chairman, this is factually incorrect, based on information that the Treasury team here at the Council have provided me with yesterday. So just a matter there. In terms of the rest of the preamble, yes, we have faced pressures over the years, and it is true that we have made £311 million worth of what are called here savings and reductions. Well, the reality is an awful lot of these savings and reductions have actually been have resulted in the more efficient and effective provision of services. I actually think that's something that all of this council should actually welcome. The fact that we're not pouring millions and millions and millions of pounds of money into old, antiquated ways of doing things. You know, one perfect example is around adult social care, where 92% of all our adult social care services are now commissioned either by the private sector or by the charitable sector, which is actually involved in not only meeting the demand that's out there, doing it in a more efficient and effective way. So, you know, we have to accept the fact that the picture is not quite as bleak as the Labour motion would actually mention. But I just want to talk about sort of austerity and actually, you know, why we're in the position we are. I want to refer the members here back to that piece of paper from 2010 from Lee and Byrne. There is no more money. The reason why this government had to start reducing public expenditure was the fact that during 13 years of the Blair government, public expenditure in this country increased from 35% of GDP to over 42% of GDP. There was no plans in place to actually cover it through taxation. So that's the old Labour approach of, oh, let's just spend money. We don't really care where it's going to come from. Let's just spend. It's taxpayers' money, you know. But you've got a history of doing this, haven't you? 1976, Dennis Healey goes to the IMF, the country's broke. 1979, the country's broke. 2010, the country's broke. The reality is Conservative governments always have to sort out the mess that we inherit from Labour. It's a simple, and you can laugh, Councillor Clark. It's historically fact. It's historically truthful. I'm sorry, but, you know, the responsibility, we inherited a mess from you, and we're trying to put it right now. And And I would urge all of these people to accept our amendment. And it's no good trying to barrack me, because I'm not going to give way to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whittington. I have Councillor Brewis, I think, wanted to come back on that. Oh, all right, certainly. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we would like to get away from the politics as we can, if we can, and think of something more positive for the people of Lincolnshire. I think it's excellent that this is coming forward, the idea of it, but we would like to suggest that you incorporate, that you also ask that we make a coordinated campaign with others adversely affected, the rural authorities, and they ask their MPs as well to try and ensure that fair treatment financially is restored to all our country, and that cities no longer be favourably treated to the detriment of rural England, because I think Lincolnshire in particular has suffered, our rural area, and the cities have benefited. So I think that needs incorporating somewhere. We need to be approaching them through our open door policies with other county councils. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mr Newton. I shall now bring Councillor Chris Brewis in.
Thank you, Chairman. I strongly support that, and I look at my friend Mike Brooks and Richard there and think that when we do meet up as these various national things, public transport consortium, the same problems we're suffering being suffered as far afield as Cumbria, Gloucestershire, Devon, County Durham. And if we make common cause, especially through our MPs, at these very, very twitchy times in Westminster, we may have more success than if we try and bat on our own. I know we do it, and I think we need to do it through our contacts, not through the LGA, but directly via what I would call shires. And certainly when I, as now the council's rep on transport for the north, I find that there are a lot of authorities facing the same problems as us, the rural ones, County Durham, parts of Yorkshire, and others in the East Midlands are suffering the same problem. And we need to make common cause. And all of those authorities affected need to get at it through their MPs. Because in the twitchy moment at the moment, if a lot of rural MPs suddenly start to make a noise collectively, more notice might be taken of it. And if we really want to get funding thrown at us, what Lincolnshire has to produce is 7 ultra-marginal seats. And money we throw at us on the scale it was to Northern Ireland a year or so ago.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. I'll bring Councillor Mrs Keighley in, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just say that I think that any business organisation would not be able to operate in a climate of piecemeal funding where they don't know what they're getting from year to year. And I think that just says everything that the central government think about local government. I've only been a councillor for 18 months, and what I've witnessed is growing centralisation. I find it really ironic that the Conservative Brexit arguers argue that they want sovereignty to control their own laws, and yet really democracy is bottom up. So we know our own areas better than central government do, and yet what I've witnessed is complete centralisation. And Councillor Whittington, when you say that you've had to sort out our mess, the Conservative Party quote, a prudent housekeepers, but what they've done is decimate public services right across the board. So we are now suffering from 21,000 police services, police men, women being reduced, and now the government have done a U-turn on that. Right across the board, public services have been decimated, and I'm sorry, but I completely disagree with what you're saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mrs Bradwell on my list.
Have I put it on? Lunch, yes. I just want, I mean, I do agree that the council has had reduced funding budgets, and I agree, over the years that is getting tougher and tougher to, you know, do what we think we need to do. But I do also believe that actually in Lincolnshire we've managed really well. If you look across at other councils, especially counties, if you go down into Surrey and that, people haven't done as good a job as we have in trying to ensure that our services remain good. Okay, we don't deliver the services that we used to do, and I actually think some of our services were very old-fashioned. The youth service was terribly old-fashioned, and actually in Lincoln there might have been quite a number of young people go, but across the county people didn't attend. I mean, and actually the fair play football and things like that that they do now for young people in our towns and in Lincoln City, you know, are very, very popular. So whether you said that actually if we got more money we'd do more of that, but I think we have to acknowledge there's lots of services that, you know, were old-fashioned and people did not want to engage with them. I think actually volunteering, I think the library service is an absolutely fantastic example of how we've got communities to actually run the libraries, and they're doing an excellent job. They're open when the community wants them. I had a library in one of my villages. It was never open when people wanted to go to it. So I think that's a success story, and actually I wouldn't say that we have to have everything delivered by officers. I think volunteers can play a great role in providing services and helping us deliver them in rural areas. As I say, I do agree that we have a problem, and we do have to try and turn government's mind to the fact that rural areas are as important as our urban areas, and I think we're doing that through fairer funding. We, as counties, we're all together, and we're all have been lobbying government, and I do agree with Martin that actually government are listening, but it is about how you turn that big oil tanker into reversing how funding is given out to some councils, which would have to be reversed into our council. So I think that will happen, but we, I think, have done a jolly good job, and I wouldn't want people in Lincolnshire to think that they weren't getting good services. Children's services, adult services, waste, highways. Okay, we could do with lots more, millions of pounds more in highways, but we are doing a pretty good job in what we do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bradwell. Councillor Kev Clark I have on my list.
Thank you, Chairman. The motion shows the government's attitude and their approach to public funding is wrong. The motion states, and it quotes, one Lord Gary Porter, who says councils can no longer be expected to run vital local services on a shoestring. If you believe, councillor, that these cuts and reductions have no effect on people, I've got a spare pair of glasses here you can look through, because you're looking in the wrong direction. The government has...
Chairman, point of order, I actually take that as a personal attack on me. So I actually take that as a personal attack, and I, point of order, I wish to strongly object to what Councillor Clark is actually saying. I think that's uncalled for. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, Chairman, I'll make it clear. Councillor Whitton made out that all these cuts were having no effect at all on people. They are.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman, I never said that. I never said
That's
that.
what you indicated.
No, I never said that. Councillor Clark, I'm afraid, point of order, Councillor Clark is misleading this chamber.
Right, members, let's have a bit of order. Councillor Clark, you may turn off your microphone. Thank you. Thank you. I have Councillor Mrs Overton, please. I have quite a few speakers, so if we can be brief, members, we have to have lunch sometime in the near future.
Thank you. Austerity is over, we were told, but financial constraint continues. Austerity has, I believe, fuelled the Brexit fire, the call for Brexit. And I believe it is a good thing that we're getting some money now, but I'm very concerned about the longer-term future. So they have listened, the government has listened to us this time, but there's nothing and we still face a £3.2 billion gap from 1920. So they've given us some of the things we've asked for. We asked for adult care support. We got that. We asked for roads support, 13.7 million coming to Lincolnshire. We got that. I also asked actually for disabled services, facilities grants. I also raised that issue, and that's come through. Some of the money that was going to that was going to the NHS is going to be used for our shared services, and that will be helpful for us. We still have not got the children's care funding, and that's 2 billion short. We're still looking for that. So they've listened to us this time. We've got heavy pressures from Brexit. Is it just a coincidence? I would like to think that this is a genuine recognition of the problems that local government is facing in providing those essential services to our residents. We're not providing the gardening or any frippity bits. We are now really only doing the essentials for our residents. And that's seen on every road that you walk and every school gate. So I would like to look closely at these two, which is, I know it's slightly confused, but I hope whatever happens, the key message that comes out from our council is that we are in desperate needs of funding if we are to continue to serve our residents in the way they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Overton. I have Councillor Robin Renshaw. Councillor Renshaw.
I won't speak long because I'm getting a bit hungry, like you, Chairman. Not to support this means that we do not believe in our missing millions and fairer funding campaigns. And I'm sure from previous debates we've had in this chamber that we're all behind the executive on this one. Lots of Mark is saying that Labour doesn't believe in savings. Well, we do, because lots of the efficiency campaigns that we've engaged in over the years are common sense. We've saved on energy and accommodation services by investing. And there's no argument with that. We're here to do the best for the people that we serve, and in doing that, we are making sure that every pound that we spend is got best value. What I do quarrel with is outsourcing in a lot of cases for outsourcing sakes as cost the people that we serve reasonably paid jobs into minimum wage levels. And then during the bailouts, and there's been several bailouts recently on the high-profile firms not providing the services, not fulfilling their obligations, and I won't even repeat the names of those firms in this chamber, as I might have to withdraw it by the monitoring officer, as happened in the past. But they know, we know that we've had these debates, and it's not in the best interest of the people that we serve. And finally, the NHS Strategy Improvement Group has recognised that population health strategy, which covers smoking cessation and all those issues that we have debated at health scrutiny, are important issues, but the Lincolnshire County Council have responsibility for that. We've had to cut it year on year, and that's not a good thing for these fundamental issues which benefit everybody. Thank you, Chairman. Can we go to lunch?
As soon as we can, Councillor Renshaw. I have Councillor Morn next on my list. I've got another 3 speakers after this. I would like to limit it to those 3 before I ask the proposer to come back. Councillor Morn.
Thank you, Chairman. I think most members in this chamber, if not all of them, agree with the sentiment that Lincolnshire does need more money. In fact, we've agreed on previous full council meetings. You know, we've supported motions to that effect. I think, for me, the problem with the opposition motion is the idea that we will return funding levels to those in 2010. You know, it's all in, even for people of my age, we can remember 2010, and we can remember a Labour government that left a budget deficit of over £100 billion. So I think, you know, the primary battle here is not the size of the cake, it's the slicing of the cake and its fair distribution to areas such as ours that needs more funding because of the extra cost pressures. The amendment to the motion, as proposed by Councillor Hill, addresses exactly that, and that's why I'll be supporting the amended motion.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Call on Councillor Reid now. Thank you very much, Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't speak too long. Councillor Moor's kind of echoed what I wanted to say, really. But yeah, the 3 bullet points that are being taken out of the Labour motion, I think, is absolutely rightly so. Pledging to use a spending review to restore council funding to 2010 levels. Well, surely the spending review will decide how much money is going to need to be spent, rather than just, you know, an arbitrary figure based on where we were 8 years ago. Equally, £2 billion in children's, £2 billion in adults. It's uncosted. It's just round figures. You know, it's meaningless. So I think it's absolutely right that we focus on, even if we got all this money back in, we would still have the problem of Lincolnshire being underfunded compared to other areas. So I think the amendment to the motion is absolutely right. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Eddie Strengle next, and then Councillor Key.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I'd like to obviously support the amendment. I'd like to support Councillor Whittington as well. I'm sure he doesn't need my support. He can handle himself. And he's put some very good facts together. Yes, I remember 1979, and before him, Dennis Healy and all the rest of the rubbish that a Labour government have delivered in the past. It's interesting to note that they are in denial all the time, Mr. Chairman. When we're talking about how they overspend on everything, none of them will admit to the fact that Harold Wilson closed more coal mines than Maggie Thatcher did. Oh no, that's a denial here. They're in denial all the time. Aren't you, Councillor Clark? Absolutely in denial. 13 years, 1997 right through to 2010, 13 years. I've been on the City Council for 25 years now, and I have listened to your side crack on about, oh, let's renationalise the bus service, let's renationalise the railways and all the rest. What you're proposing now in your potential government, God forbid we ever get a Marxist, Trotskyist government in this country, what you're actually proposing is to spend £1 trillion, £1 trillion, 1,000 million pounds, sorry, 1,000 billion pounds in actually delivering stuff that, again, you have never costed. This is exactly what happens every year, and you're absolutely spot on, Councillor Whittington. We mop up after they've destroyed the finances. I will say one thing in the favour of the Labour lot. You're very economical, and that is economical with the truth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Strengle. Councillor Key, my final speaker on this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was going to say that's before we got the amended thing about moving to, you know, get on with where we was. It's about a motion, and then all the political blustering and that was started, and I find it myself sat here, I find it a little bit offensive. We was told a few meetings ago that we weren't like to have a go at each other as such in political law. I've just seen there, nothing short of scandalous. And I hope, well, there isn't none there, but if there's been some public here, there's been laughing the socks off. Can we move to the point that we should be, the motion, please?
Seconded.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Councillor Mrs Newton if she's happy with her points that were raised as from the independents have been covered.
I don't see any mention of it in the amendment, but I would hope that whatever happens, it's a thought that's incorporated by the leader, that we do make noises to similar counties that are underfunded like us for our rurality, and I'm sure Councillor Hill would take it on board.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, obviously, it is encompassed in the fairer funding comment, but I don't want to prolong the meeting unnecessarily. We could put a few words about working with councils together if that's required, but my view, it's already incorporated in the fairer funding bit which we've amended.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Councillor Mrs Everton.
Talking about the amount of money that we get from central government as a whole, I'd rather it was the whole sum. If we only focus on the fairer funding part, which, as you know, is diminishing, it's probably not the best route. What we really need to concentrate is the amount of money that comes into Lincolnshire. Thank you.
Can I just say, Chairman, Mrs Overton just reads the amendment. It says the fairer funding, adult social care and local government funding reviews next year. Well, that will incorporate, obviously, more sustainable funding for adult care and indeed, hopefully, more sustainable funding for the whole of local government.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Now, I think, is it Councillor Parker can sum up at the end, is that right? Or is it Councillor Hill on the amendment? No? Okay. Yes, I do. Yes, I say, do you wish to have the right of reply, Councillor Parker? You have the right.
Yeah. This motion was moved in good faith, and I think it was responded to in good faith by Councillor Hill. But then it got out of hand in terms of politics, and two people in particular on the Conservative benches didn't, I think, reflect the general mood of the meeting. I think the point is really that we have a situation where local government in Lincolnshire and nationally is not being funded very well, and we wanted to put forward a motion identifying the significance of the cuts that had taken place since 2010 and point a way forward. And that was our ambition, and in a sense, I'd like it to be restricted to that ambition, to bring out, quite simply, the sheer volume of money that has not gone into Lincolnshire, which could have done. Okay, now there are arguments quite separately. We didn't go down that particular route about whether or not it should have been at the level that we've quoted, whether or not it was to do with the over excessive spending that Councillor Pole referred to, that Councillor Strengle referred to, or whether it was to do with the worldwide economic changes that took place. I mean, one of the small points is that one of the things that austerity was about was reducing the national spend to zero when it came to borrowing, and that was a commitment by George Osborne and David Cameron, which was shelved with Philip Hammond and put forward. So, in a sense, one of the things that austerity was supposed to deliver was a major reduction in government spending so that borrowing was reduced to nil by 2016, then 2020, and then 24, and has disappeared. We're in local government are facing different issues, and we would still like our motion to go forward for the vote, and we look favourably on the amendment that's been put forward by Councillor Hill. It addresses most of the points that we were making, and as such, we will press for a vote on the original Labour motion and be willing to accept the amendment should our motion not be accepted.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Yes, that's right, yeah. Right, we now need to take the vote on the amendment. We all should have had a copy that's been printed. Sorry, we vote on the amendment first for members, yes. I thought you would have known by now, Councillor Strengle. Yeah. Right, we've all had this circulated. Hopefully we've all had time to read it. And so now we have to take the vote. So all those in favour of the amendment, please show. That looks pretty good. Are there any against? And are there any abstentions? Well, that is clearly passed. So that now becomes a substantive motion. Is that correct? Yeah. So we never need to take any vote on the second one. Again on the substantive. Yeah. So now we just need to go on this substantive motion now. So again, all those in favour, please show. All those against. Any abstentions? That's lovely. Switch myself off. That concludes the meeting. Again, thank you to everybody for. Thank you for everybody with the patience with the technology. Can I remind members to collect their posts from their pigeonholes after the meeting? Can we have a bit of attention, please? And I would like to wish everybody a very happy Merry Christmas and a happy, but more importantly, a prosperous New Year. Thank you very much, members. Enjoy your lunch.